begin our story by zooming into the aftermath of Izuku being bullied by Bakugo, him picking up his notebook as he would say, "Damn Bakugo, don't you know that if I actually went through with it, you'd be held liable?" Beginning to walk through the tunnel, making his way home. This is when out of nowhere, Izuku would turn around feeling something tugging at his leg when he would watch this gigantic green sludgy monster beginning to take form behind him, questioning, "Hey kid, mind if I borrow your body?" Beginning to wrap itself around Izuku, all the while the boy would struggle trying to grasp out of it, but nothing. This is when Izuku's mind would start racing, and as multiple thoughts of death would finally hit his mind, and tears would start pouring out of the boy's face at the thought that he never even got to try to become a pro. Suddenly, his heart would start beating faster than ever, and the quirk that the boy was actually born with would finally activate, it culminating in a massive explosion of blue energy that would send the sludge villain splattering here, there, and there. This is when suddenly All Might would arrive just on cue, manhole cover plopping out as All Might would say, "I am here?" Staring at the scene of a young boy who's on the ground, all the while the sludge villain that he was chasing was already dispersed as though he had already thrown a punch. All Might walking towards him, the coughing Izuku, questioning him on what took place. Izuku looking up to see the feet of All Might and almost immediately running backwards. All Might, it's you," he would say. All Might looking towards him with confusion as he would say, "Young man, were you responsible for this?" Izuku looking at All Might, kind of just still feeling groggy from that explosion of turbo energy that had finally manifested. Mind you, that was a bizarrely large amount of turbo energy, and had it not been for the sludge villain, Deku might have actually died, because it sort of tanked the explosion power behind the turbo energy that had pretty much been storing up within Izuku for the last 14 years. So with Izuku looking towards All Might and kind of like rubbing his eyes together, he would explain that he's not sure, that 1 second he was within the sludge villain thinking it was it, and then he was on the ground coughing for breath. All Might at this moment would ask what his quirk was, that maybe he used that unconsciously, but Deku would say that he's quirkless, until suddenly blue swirls of energy would surround Izuku, and the boy would stare at his hands going, "What's happening to me?" All Might staring at the boy as he would say, "Maybe you're unlocking your quirk," suddenly coughing as he would go, "Well kid, I appreciate you for taking care of the sludge villain," picking up some little bits and pieces of the goop before jumping off. Izuku not even having an opportunity to latch onto him or ask, "Is it possible for me to become a hero?" because All Might straight up had to get going since his time limit was about to end. So with Izuku now kind of just being left there wondering what's going on with him, this is when Izuku would pretty much put that at the back of his mind, thinking that he needs to make his way to the quirk doctor, excited as ever because regardless of what this power is, now he has a power. And that's more Izuku could have ever asked for. So with him walking home happy as ever, the sludge incident with Bakugo never happening, Deku would walk by a nearby construction site when suddenly a robotic creature would come flying towards him, going, "Permission to assimilate?" Izuku looking at it as he would go, "What?" And steel would literally latch onto his chest and proceed to pretty much merge with Deku. It's in this moment that as Izuku would open his eyes and look at his hands, he would be covered in an armor-like suit, the people on the street all staring at him as somebody would throw a can at Deku going, "You're not allowed to use your quirk in public!" Deku kind of freaking out as he would yell out, "I'm sorry!" running towards a nearby alleyway. This is when Izuku would ask, "What are you? And what are you doing to me?" With Steel telling him that his name is Steel. And to stop freaking out for a second, he has a lot of explaining to do. Izuku in this moment would say, "What? How am I supposed to not freak out?" As Steel would say, "Cool it, kid." This is when suddenly he would pause and Steel would finally explain everything. "Look, as crazy as this is gonna sound, my name is Steel and I'm essentially an alien. I was supposed to stay asleep, that is until your turbo energy awoke me." Turbo energy? What's that? Deku would ask, is that my quirk? Steel just going, I'm getting deja vu. This is when Steel would go on to explain that whatever quirk, as he wants to call it, or power he's generating, is essentially energy that powers Steel. It's like food for him, and they need each other. Going on to explain that Steel has some properties that can be helpful for him, and he can provide him food, and some entertainment, possibly. This is when Deku would ask why he chose him, and Steel would reiterate going, "Kid, it's because you have turbo energy." Izuku being like, "Yeah, but what is that?" Steel going on to explain how turbo energy works and how it powers him as an Ultra Link. Deku finally sort of kind of beginning to understand it, would say, so my quirk is producing energy? Steel telling him, yeah, something like that, going on to explain to Izuku that without him, he'll die. Deku going, what? I don't want to die, as Steel would say, and you won't, because thanks to me being on your chest, you'll never have to worry about that again. Deku looking at him as he would ask where he comes from, Steel telling him that that's not important. But what is important is that now Izuku can finally go on to become a hero of sorts. Deku looking at him and saying, wait, you mean it? With a quirk like this, I can become a hero? Steel just being like, yeah, you can become a hero, you can become a power symbol, whatever you want. Now, let's go home. Steel saying this as he would activate Izuku's flight mode and fly him straight to his house. Deku freaking out, almost similar to that Blue Beetle scene if you guys have seen that movie, with Izuku arriving crashing dead into his parking lot, Deku asking Steel what was that for? Steel explaining that that was a taste of what they can do together. Izuku looking at him as Steel would detach himself floating nearby Izuku, and he would say, whoa, so by having you by my side, I can use different costumes like that? Steel saying, modes, it's modes. As Izuku would look at him and go, right, modes. Steel looking at him and saying, kid, you don't have a single backbone in your body, do ya? Izuku rubbing the back of his head as he would say, I mean, I wouldn't say all that. As Steel would say, come on, let's just go get you some food. Deku entering the house with Steel introducing himself to Inko saying, nice to meet ya. Name's Steel, and starting today, I'm part of your son's quirk. Inko looking at Steel and smiling, saying, wait, Izuku, is this really true? You have a quirk? Deku looking at his mom as generating some turbo energy, he would say, looks like it. And she would say, oh, we gotta take you to the quirk doctor right now. So immediately they make their way there. And after checking the quirk factor, Izuku would be confirmed as a late bloomer, being told that his quirk is called Generator. Steel inside Deku's head going, no, turbo energy. With Izuku saying, excuse me, can we change the name of the quirk to turbo energy? The doctor looking at him and saying, I don't see why not, as he would change the status of Izuku's quirk, and Izuku would finally have Steel unbound from his body. Steel introducing himself, as Izuku would go on to explain that his quirk has a little bit of sentience. The doctor saying, whoa, those are rare nowadays, but they are becoming more common, jotting that down in his notes, with Izuku eventually making his way home and asking Steel a gazillion questions. Steel answering as many as possible, with Izuku getting the gist of the fact that a long time ago, when Steel was merged with somebody else by the name of Max, there were these things called Ultra Links, which ultimately Max ended up handling, and now because of that, he's here. Izuku would smile, saying he must have been an incredible hero. Steel saying he was his best buddy. Izuku saying that he hopes to become even half the man that Max was. Steel replying by saying, well, you can try, kid, with Izuku smiling. This is when we would jump cut to the next day, Steel waking him up almost as though he was like a freaking army sergeant being like, wake up, wake up, wake up. Deku going, oh, what's happening? And Steel would say, it's time to train, and we've got 3 hours before school starts. With that weak little body of yours, you'll hardly generate any turbo energy. We've got to get you fit and up and running. So this is when Izuku, groggy as ever, would begin doing this routine every day, doing a bit of hardcore exercise prior to school and taking his dietary very, very serious, resulting in a much more fit Izuku that we would get by the end of the 10 months, with Steel helping him out very, very much so, and the fact that now he has turbo energy, his training would just be supercharged, with Izuku also learning a plethora of different turbo modes that he has, learning the turbo base mode, which essentially just amplifies most of his stats, you know, offers reflexes, agility, and all that normal stuff. Then we got turbo strength mode, which Izuku loves. It gives him, well, strength. Turbo flight mode, which, you know, kind of says it in the name. And then we got turbo scuba mode, which Izuku would definitely work on, considering that most of his training would be held right by a beach. So Izuku would be pretty damn talented when it comes to fighting underwater. And he would also be equipped with turbo speed mode, which, I mean, kind of says it in the name, with him lastly having the turbo camouflage mode, which is essentially a mode that makes his armor look like normal clothes. It's kind of like a hologram, because at all times, Izuku actually comes with that base mode armor. Since from the moment that Izuku was assimilated with Steel, that armor was now never coming off. So with that said, we now zoom in on Izuku, who'd be doing a bit of training in the water, going, whoa ho! Jumping out of it, Steel telling him, you've gotten a whole lot stronger, kid. Maybe you might turn out to be half as cool as Max was. Izuku looking at his watch as he would say, crap, Steel, we're gonna be late. There's 5 minutes for us to get to the examination area. Steel telling him that it's no problem, as Steel would activate flight mode, taking him there immediately. Deku going, we're not supposed to do this, remember? I could get in trouble. Steel telling him, it's this or you're not passing that test. So with Izuku landing right in front of Uraraka, kind of just awkwardly being, hi, Uraraka would say, hi? Izuku making his way inside and taking the test, as he would ace it much like you would expect, and then finally make his way to the robot portion, where Izuku would start kind of freaking out internally, going, crap, this is all getting real all of a sudden. I have to fight against real robots, he would think. Steel telling him to calm down and to just put his training to use, saying that Max wasn't half as much of a coward, and he was actually fighting something trying to kill him. Deku saying, you know, Steel, that's not very encouraging. Steel saying, and you know what? It's not very encouraging to have a partner that's a scaredy cat. Deku just thinking, I hope I don't die, with Ida walking towards him and being like, hey, you're being very distracting to all the other participants. Izuku looking at him as he would apologize, Ida telling him that it's weird to just sit there talking to himself, to use his inner voice, with Izuku noting that Ida was low-key right because everyone was staring. This, however, is when things would be interrupted by President Mike, who would say, go, 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 there's no countdowns in a real fight. All the students lunging towards the direction of all the robots, with Izuku going, whoa, they've all gotten ahead of me, and they're so fast. Steel sighing and saying, kid, we'll show them who's faster. Izuku going, oh right, turbo speed mode, as suddenly his body armor would shift and the normal clothes he was wearing would turn into a suit of armor, allowing Izuku to run even faster than Ida, 10 times that in fact. Izuku blitzing towards the robot that the first contestant was about to take, him running right by it. Steel going, what? Why don't you take it out? Izuku saying they were going for it, and he would say, come on kid, get your head in the game. If you don't impress these heroes, you'll never become one yourself. Deku locking in as he would say, you're right. Jumping into the air, she would say, turbo, strength mode. Lunging up into the air as becoming this gigantic armored version of himself, he would lunge towards the direction of a rinky-dinky one-pointer, punching it as he would send it crashing into the building, exploding on contact. This is when Izuku, realizing that he is just leagues and leagues above these robots, would proceed to wreak havoc on them, garnering a grand total of 86 robot points by the end of 7 minutes, with Steel in his head going left, right, punch, kick. Izuku following Steel's directions to a T until eventually the ground would start shaking. Steel going, that doesn't sound good. This is when Izuku would look up and would see the gigantic robot that is the Zero Pointer, Steel detaching himself from Deku as he would look at him and say, look kid, now you've got 2 choices. You can turn tail and run like everyone else, or you can show this school who Izuku Midoriya is. Deku looking at the robot, and through fear, he would say, let's do it, Steel. Steel going, attaboy, as Izuku would look towards that direction and suddenly spot that a girl was in danger. Izuku instantly kicking into overdrive and saying, turbo, speed mode, blitzing towards the direction of Uraraka and grabbing her by the arm as removing all the rubble up off of her. He would be gone before the Zero Pointer would take a step, and with Izuku taking her to a safe distance, Izuku would then rush back in, Zero Pointer barely having the chance to lift its leg back up, as Izuku, using his speed mode, would literally run up the robot, eventually jumping into the air as he would say, turbo, strength mode, reeling his fist back and smashing a punch so diabolically powerful into the face of the Zero Pointer, sending it crashing backward, much like the canonical punch. Everybody watching on as Izuku's incredible strength would have been on full showcase, with Izuku going, alright Steel, flight mode. Steel saying, you're not gonna like this kid, but you're out of juice. Izuku beginning to fall down to the ground, with Steel saying, tuck and roll kid, tuck and roll. Deku doing just that, as landing on the ground, Deku would get up with barely any damage. Deku asking Steel why he didn't warn him he was low on turbo energy. Steel saying that he thought if he did, he probably wouldn't have fought the robot. Izuku saying, I wouldn't have. I would have just saved the girl. Steel saying, but think about how much cooler we looked. With everybody staring at Deku and him looking around, being like, this is when the crowd would erupt into cheers saying, dude, you're incredible. You're a guaranteed top 10 pro hero in the future at bare minimum. Deku receiving praise from multiple people, with Recovery Girl coming through and saying, get out of the way, get out of the way. She would meet Izuku's eyes, and suddenly she would ask if he's okay. Him nodding, as she would say, good. Now take this and run along. Izuku accepting a little lollipop from her, as making his way home, Izuku would have made his official debut, which obviously would have impressed the heroes and led to a very prompt acceptance letter, with Izuku being summoned to his old middle school by the principal, who pretty much just wants to brag about the fact that this year, not only do they have one student joining UA, but two! So with the teacher praising both students, this is when he would leave them alone in the room. Bakugo giving Deku a death stare, Izuku just being like, Steel, what do I do? Steel telling him to show him who's boss. Deku saying, I can't do that, he's my childhood friend. Bakugo just simply saying, and what exactly are you muttering over there, nerd? Deku being like, nothing, as the meeting would end, and this is when both students would finally be left outside. Bakugo in this moment would attempt to press Deku, however, Steel telling Deku that he's an idiot for just allowing this to happen would take control of Izuku, tapping into flight mode as he would disappear. Bakugo watching on in horror and anger as he would be pissed that Deku had hidden this quirk from him so long. This is when Deku would arrive home and would be freaking out, just thinking, what's Bakugo gonna do to me when he gets his hands on me? Steel telling him to calm down, that from his scans, he's much stronger than that boy. Deku telling him, yeah, but he's not about to go beating people up. Steel telling him that it would be good for him. It might make him a bit of a tough guy. Deku saying, and what if I don't want to be one? As Steel would pretty much like roll his eyes, not that he could, but pretty much end up lecturing Deku and telling him not to act like such a coward. Izuku apologizing for the way that he's acting right now, as we would then jump cut to the next day, which would mark the first day of UA, Izuku walking into the classroom as he would take note of all of his surroundings, noticing that Bakugo's there. A stiff-armed and stiff-legged Izuku would suddenly walk into the classroom, Bakugo staring daggers at him, until Uraraka would break the tension in the room going, Armor Boy! This is when looking towards Izuku, she would thank him for saving her. Deku practically wanted to thank her for saving him from this tense situation, as suddenly everything would be broken up by Aizawa, and we would now have the quirk apprehension test stuff happening. This is when Aizawa, telling them all to quiet down, would go on to tell them that for all their lives they've been told to hold back and act ordinary. But that's all about to change, because at this school, they're gonna clearly see who the strongest and weakest is. And today specifically, they're gonna see if they're truly worth of being at UA, as he would toss a ball towards Deku, telling him to demonstrate by tossing that ball as hard as he possibly could, warning Deku not to hold back. This is when Steel would smile, saying that he likes the way that this teacher operates, as Izuku, making his way towards the front of the class, would suddenly think to himself, so Steel, what should we go with? Strength mode? Steel nodding, as Izuku would do just that. Turbo! Strength mode! As he would suddenly become large and everybody would watch on, Bakugo most of all, being pissed. Huh? He has more? Deku grasping the ball as he would toss it, actually going on to beat Bakugo's score and getting second in the class for the distance ball throw. Pissing off Bakugo, who doesn't think that he could even get half of that. Him rushing towards Izuku in an attempt to attack him. This, however, is when Aizawa would stop that in its tracks, and Deku would practically be thanking the man from within, with Steel calling him a coward. This is when Deku, though feeling a bit awkwarded out because Bakugo was literally trying to beat him up, although while the rest of the class was hyping him up, saying his quirk is incredible, Deku would be sitting there not knowing what side he should believe. Should he feel like the weakling he's always been, or should he feel like his new man? Steel telling him that if he wants his opinion, he should act like a new man. Izuku attempting to do this and being a little awkward at it. This would lead to the grip string test, with Izuku absolutely shattering that thing, the standing long jump, Izuku once again using his strength mode to clear the sandbox, and the repeated side-to-side steps, Izuku using his speed mode to just absolutely outdo the competition, followed by his base mode, which greatly enhances his stat, which he would be using to do the remaining 3 tests, leading Izuku to actually being first in the leaderboard, shocking everybody, especially Izuku, who still has yet to adjust to the fact that he's no longer weak little Deku. And with that being the case and the day finally being over, Bakugo would simply walk by Deku silently, no shoulder bump, no nothing, leaving Deku to just wonder what's going on with him, because while he was walking by him, Deku low-key cowered in fear, but when he was gone, Deku would be confused. Steel saying that he probably realized who the big dog is now, telling Izuku that it's high time he does the same. Izuku looking at Steel as he would say he doesn't feel like that. This, however, is when we would jump cut to the next day of school, them all being in class, when suddenly All Might would barge through the door going, "I am here!" coming in like a normal person. Everybody getting excited, with Deku most of all, seeing as remember, this is his favorite hero of all time, and in this timeline he doesn't have the same relationship with All Might, so finding out that the symbol of peace is training him would practically lead Izuku to almost passing out. This is when All Might would go on to reveal to the class their costumes, and after us getting a little suit up scene, we would have everybody in the class being divided into groups, where All Might would tell them that now they're going to be seeing what their combat abilities are. Deku being confused, so they're going to throw us into the fire? Steel saying that that's the best form of training, although All Might would finish explaining, and Bakugo would select the ball that would directly pair both of them against each other. This would cause Izuku to quite literally audibly gulp, and Steel to sit there smiling, well, that is if he could, telling Izuku that this is perfect. It's about time that he showed him a lesson for the way he treated him. Deku saying that it's really alright as he would stare at the glare of Bakugo, who was ice cold and serious, clearly preparing himself for this fight to come. So as Izuku, as stiff as ever, would walk towards Uraraka, this is when she would ask, "Is there any reason why that boy seems to hate you so much?" Deku saying that that's his childhood friend, now turned bully, Katsuki Bakugo. Uraraka being shocked, going, "What? You have bullies? With a quirk like that? I can't believe it. You should be able to show him who's who." Steel in Deku's head just going, "That's what I'm saying!" All the while Deku would give a nervous chuckle, and Uraraka would say, "Well, don't worry. Today, we're gonna beat him." "Yeah, we'll do that, Uraraka." Izuku would say, nervous as ever, as Steel in his head would be telling him, "Calm down, kid. If at any moment you feel like you can't do it, just let me take control and I'll handle the bully for you." Izuku telling Steel that that's not gonna happen, considering that he knows what Steel wants to do. Steel rolling his eyes, as he would tell Izuku to concentrate and be careful, considering that that boy could actually do some serious damage to him. And with Izuku nodding, this is when putting his suit on, Izuku would ask Steel what suit he thinks would be best for this. Steel telling him that it's probably stealth mode. Izuku questioning him, "Stealth mode? I have more?" Steel telling him, "Kid, you have no idea. Just power up some turbo energy and I'll show you." Izuku immediately uttering the words, "Turbo stealth mode," as suddenly his suit would change and Izuku would find himself completely invisible. Uraraka looking at him and going, "Whoa, where'd you go?" Izuku tapping her on her shoulders and saying he's right here. She would note that he's completely invisible, and on top of that she couldn't even hear his footsteps. Izuku hearing that would think, "This is perfect. With a suit like this, I could possibly even enter the bomb room and get a hold of it without having to fight Kacchan." Steel telling him that that's not what a hero would do, asking Izuku if he believes All Might ever feared or cowered in the presence of anyone. Izuku just going, "No, but I mean it's," as Steel would tell him, "No, nothing. You're gonna get the jump on that boy, and then tap into turbo strength mode and beat him senseless." Izuku telling him that he doesn't think he can. Bakugo's just being interrupted shortly by the sounds of an explosion. "Deku!" Bakugo would scream, as lunging towards the direction of the hallway, he would see Uraraka, looking at her and pointing his gauntlet, asking where the boy is. Uraraka nodding no, as Bakugo would grit his teeth, going, "Well then I guess I'll have to take you out." Rushing at Izuku's teammate to hurt her, with Izuku's hero instincts finally snapping. "Turbo! Strength mode!" as a gigantic fist would go hurtling towards the direction of Bakugo, hitting him in the ribs as it would send him crashing into the next room over. Us zooming in on Bakugo, who getting up a little weakly would wipe some blood off his mouth, turning at Deku and saying, "That's more like it. Come on, Deku!" blasting an explosion behind him and shooting a massive explosion square at the face of Izuku, who thanks to his strength mode would completely dodge the blow. Izuku swinging his arm wildly as Bakugo narrowly would manage to avoid the blow. Bakugo uttering out, "So you've been hiding all this power from me all this time. Bet you were laughing behind my back!" blasting an explosion square at the back of Izuku's head as he would be startled by this. Suddenly Steel telling him, "Kid, go stealth mode." Izuku going, "Turbo, stealth mode," completely going invisible, with Bakugo saying, "You think some camouflage gonna hide you from me?" Blasting an explosion straight at the direction Izuku would be standing at, actually having noticed Izuku's presence, since if y'all don't remember in season 1, there's actually a clip where Bakugo and Kirishima in the midst of the USJ attack, Bakugo quite literally blasts an explosion explosion at some toad dude who was camouflaged. Like Bakugo couldn't see him and he still managed to take him out completely. So we're going to be saying this sort of same principle applies here. And after blasting Izuku with this explosion, the boy would be sent crashing into the wall, ricocheting on the ground, his camouflage mode completely disappearing. This is when Bakugo walking over towards him would tell him that he's nothing but a weak little Izuku, and he's wrong to have thought he was better than him. Blasting an explosion at Deku would send him turtling towards the ground even further. This is when Bakugo would smirk as both gauntlets would make a strange noise, Izuku looking up a bit groggy as he would ask Steel what they should do. This, however, is when Steel would recognize what Bakugo was planning, and he would say, "Kid, you need to get out of here." Izuku immediately looking up as he could see Bakugo pulling the pins to some gauntlets and connecting two and two together, recognizing that they look somewhat like grenades. Izuku would understand what's about to happen, hearing Bakugo say, "You know, Deku, I've been wanting to try these explosions for a while now, and I think you're the perfect test subject." Crying out to Uraraka, "You better get out of the way unless you want to die!" Pulling the pin, Izuku almost immediately on cue saying, "Turbo! Speed mode!" Blitzing towards the direction of Uraraka and saving her from the range of the explosion, as Bakugo would cackle, "These are even cooler than I thought! I never expected they'd pack such a punch." All the while Deku's suit would have significant damage and Uraraka would ask, "Are you okay?" All the while we would hear like a noise in Deku's head, and Steel in the background would be going, Kid, are you there?" All the while Bakugo would inch closer and closer. This would lead Steel to saying, "Sorry kid, but I gotta," as suddenly, taking control of Izuku's body, Steel would say, "Turbo, strength mode!" Transforming into a hulking giant, as simply just ramming into the body of Bakugo, taking advantage of the fact that the corridor was so small he couldn't dodge, Izuku would ram Bakugo square into the wall, with Steel lifting his arm backwards and punching Bakugo with a full power strength blow, which would send the boy crashing out of the building entirely and onto the ground, completely unconscious, shocking everyone who was watching with just the sheer strength, because it's not like he just punched him out through one wall. No, he sent that man crashing through like 4 things of concrete practically before hitting the solid ground and caving his body into it. So with everybody watching this display, they'd be shocked. Kirishima going, "Whoa, I never knew Midoriya had that in him. He's so damn manly." Kirishima saying that quirk of his is insane. All the while our beloved crybaby protagonist would literally just be standing there unmoving, Steel continuing to pressure Izuku to wake up with nothing. This is when Steel, looking towards Uraraka, would wave to come here, not wanting to say anything, Uraraka following suit. And as soon as Uraraka would open the door, this is when Izuku would snap back out of it, Steel asking him if he's okay, with Izuku telling him, yeah, he's fine, asking what happened, Steel saying that he'll explain later, that for now, they've got something to take care of. Izuku immediately tapping into stealth mode, as Ida, not having noticed that Izuku was even nearby, and unaware of the fact that Izuku had that mode, would just allow Izuku enough leeway to place his hand on the bomb before rematerializing in his normal suit and hearing All Might cry, "Hero team wins!" This is when Ida, turning around to see the bomb, would see Izuku standing there going, "What? When did you get here?" Izuku looking towards Ida as he would tell him that he has something called stealth mode. Ida kind of facepalming, realizing that he failed to take more modes into account, saying that next time, things won't turn out this way. Izuku extending a hand, with Ida shaking it, saying that he's glad he was his first opponent. Izuku smiling, as following this, Izuku making his way outside would see Bakugo, and rushing towards him to check if he's okay, would ask Steel if he did this. Steel telling him that he did, that the kid was practically gonna kill him had he not stopped him. Izuku telling him that he shouldn't have in turn tried to kill him back, saying that he knows Steel could have done it in a much better fashion. Steel telling him that kid left them no choice. Izuku explaining that he always has a choice, saying that now things will be weird between him and Bakugo. Steel saying that things were weird before, so he shouldn't worry, trying to crack a joke to lighten the mood. But Izuku, kind of not being in the mood for it, would kind of just be silent, and the day would sort of end on a bad note, which would be a little strange, because a rift would kind of have been created between Izuku and Steel, where Izuku realizes that if he goes unconscious, Steel could just straight up make decisions for him, and what if they're not the ones he wants to make? And with Izuku thinking these things throughout the entirety of the day, Izuku would sort of be laying in his bed, as Steel, kind of having gone quiet ever since that last little encounter, would tell the kid that he's sorry for how he acted, explaining that Izuku just needs to get a backbone, at least one of these days. He can't act like a hero and act like a coward all at the same time. And it's frustrating, because the boy still acts like he's powerless even though he has one of the most powerful abilities in the entire world. Going on to explain to Deku that with his powers and him by his side, he's easily at least on the level of All Might. Izuku looking at Steel and telling him he knows. But for as long as he remembers, he was powerless, he was weak, and if he acts like this, it's because for years he's felt like this. Even though, yeah, now he has powers and he can fly and go invisible and super strength and speed, he still needs some time to get adjusted to it. Explaining that he's strong, but he still doesn't feel like that. With Steel saying, well, let's fix that. Maybe some more training will help, some more hero work? Izuku kind of chuckling and saying, yeah. We'll definitely get on that as soon as possible, Steel. So with Steel and Deku finally having had one of those nice little talks that they should have been having a long time ago, this is when we would jump cut to the very next day, as Izuku would find himself in class when suddenly they would all be informed about the UHJ. Students all getting hyped thinking that they're going to go on a field trip, when Izuku would say that they're most likely actually going to be going to the unforeseen simulation joint. Everybody kind of almost immediately being like, oh. As Izuku would say, it's still a great opportunity, because they're most likely going to be taught how to handle natural disasters and stuff like that. Everybody's saying, yeah, I guess that's kind of cool, plus we get to use our quirks. So the class getting excited would then be handed a couple of papers, or permission slips, as everybody would turn them in, and we sort of flash forward to the actual day of the USJ. This is when all the students unloading from the bus would all look at this gigantic facility, all of them taking everything in, with Izuku thinking that he can't wait to show just how well he works underwater. That is, until suddenly a purple misty warp gate would appear in front of him, and out would come a voice with two glowing eyes. It's saying, "Apologies, heroes, but it appears we weren't invited." Multiple warp gates opening simultaneously, with the students believing this to have been a hero exercise. This is when Aizawa, finally lunging forward, would say, "13, keep the kids safe." Although while Bakugo and Kirishima, lunging to the direction of Kurogiri, would both be warp gated, along with everybody else who normally would be. So with Izuku falling into this large vat of like water filled with multiple criminals, Izuku would say, "Steel, turbo scuba mode." As suddenly, he would have a bunch of flippers on his armor, and Izuku would swim through that water fast as ever, punching at multiple villains, all the while Tsuyu down there would be watching on in awe. Since just a few moments ago, she thought she was gonna do the saving, but it appears Deku's gonna take all these villains down in a matter of minutes. So Izuku would tell Steel, "Come on!" And Steel would be watching the way Deku's fighting underwater. Steel would say, "Wow, kid, you're finally getting into character." Deku telling him that he's been thinking about it a lot, and he needs to start acting the way Steel says. So as punches and kicks and stuff would be thrown, Steel would smile, saying that the kid's doing an incredible job. Until finally all of the villains, or most of them, would be rounded up, with a few of them kind of just like cowering from Deku, meaning that him having this heroic heart, he wasn't going to specifically target them. He finally makes it onto the boat, seeing Mineta and Tsuyu, where he would ask them what the plan should be. Tsuyu saying that she thinks he should make it since he's the strongest. So as Izuku looks at Tsuyu, he would say, "Alright, cool, then let's turbo flight mode." Lunging into the air, Tsuyu and Mineta on his arms, as flying towards the direction of the rest of the heroes. This is when Izuku, dropping both of them off, would be flying in the air, thinking that he's done all he needs to for now. That is, until Steel would say, "Kid, I don't mean to rain on your parade, but your teacher is currently gonna die at this pace." Izuku looking towards the direction of Aizawa and recognizing that the Nomu was quite literally crushing his skull and slamming him face first into the concrete. So with Izuku seeing this and feeling fear, like literally having like a sweat drop down his face, something would just snap in Deku, telling him that if he doesn't act now, he will never be capable of calling himself a hero. So flying towards the direction of it, Izuku would land uttering, "Turbo strength mode," reeling his arm back as much as possible before punching it as hard as he possibly could, causing the Nomu to be sent flying back, recoiling in pain, with Izuku checking on Aizawa. "Aizawa, are you?" Shigaraki scratching at his neck as he would screech, "Nomu, stop standing around and kill that brat." The Nomu screeching out as lunging towards the direction of Deku, reeling its arm back, it would throw a massive punch which would send Deku flying backwards. The Nomu then rushing towards him and grasping grasping onto Izuku's helmet, attempting to crush it. This is when Steel would say, "Kid, if you got a plan, you might as well try it now." Izuku saying, "I do." Both fists punching at the Nomu's stomach as sending it back once more. Izuku would tell Steel that he thinks he could go full throttle on this thing. So his turbo energy beginning to quite literally shine from how much he's actually producing, Izuku would lunge towards the Nomu, punching it once more as Steel would tell him, "Kid, you keep fighting at this pace and your turbo energy will only last for about a minute." Izuku saying, "I think that's all I need." As throwing a punch towards the direction of the Nomu's stomach once more, he would send it into the air, jumping up into the air, clobbering both of his fists together as bang, he would send that thing crashing down with a hammer fist, the Nomu crashing onto the ground with Izuku uttering, "Come on Steel, let's try that new mode," like very, very fast, mind you, all the while saying, "Turbo, cannon mode," spinning in the air, turning into like this roly-poly type thing. Izuku would go crashing into the body of the Nomu, spinning over and over as it would start tearing into its flesh. The Nomu recoiling from this as it would screech out in pain, all the while it would be drove deeper and deeper into the earth. This is when suddenly two of the Nomu's arms would fall flat and Izuku would stop, telling Steel that he thinks it's over. This, however, is when Shigaraki would smirk towards the direction of Izuku, saying, "Over? You think it's over, kid? The Nomu has regeneration and shock absorption. All that managed to do was piss it off." The Nomu standing up almost immediately as Izuku, looking at that thing in shock, would say, "Steel?" The Nomu rushing towards him. As punching at Izuku's cannon mode, he would send him rolling backwards. However, using the shape of the actual USJ, Izuku would roll on it to the top and then go flying back at the direction of the Nomu, using the momentum of the punch and the speed that he had generated to ram at the Nomu once again, holding it downwards. All the while Steel would say, "Kid, your transformation's only gonna last for another 20 seconds. If you're gonna end it, you gotta do it now." Izuku saying, "Full throttle, Steel!" As suddenly, Izuku's cannon mode would start spinning like 50 times faster, and we watch on as a worried Shigaraki scratching at his neck would go, "No, no, no! This isn't how it was supposed to go!" As finally, seeing Izuku come to a stop after like 3 seconds of going full throttle, Izuku would no longer be capable of maintaining his form. Standing up, as the Nomu caved into the ground, dang near completely unconscious, would lead Deku to believe it was defeated. So standing there looking at Shigaraki, who pissed as ever would lunge at Deku, trying to kill him, would suddenly be defended by All Might. All Might sending a punch which would shatter Shigaraki's arm, sending him crashing onto the ground as he would cry out, "Kirigiri, get us out of here!" And the Nomu on the ground would just be going, "Ah!" Having been defeated by Deku, this is when Izuku would be asked by All Might if he's okay. Izuku nodding as he would tell All Might that he got here just in time. All Might saying that he doesn't think so because it appears like his student took on the challenge of defeating the big bad. Izuku going bright red as he would realize he's getting praised by the symbol of peace, Steel telling him that he told him he could do it, while a practically starstruck Deku would just be taking everything in, realizing that Steel was so damn right. He should have started acting like this a long time ago. Izuku finally finishing the day, as going home, he would tell his mother everything. Steel, and Deku both doing like a little bit of a reenactment of how everything went, as Inko would be like, "You mean to tell me my baby fought against a gigantic monster and won?" Her crying as she's like, "Oh, Izuku, I'm so happy." And Deku realizing like, "Wait, I fought a giant monster and won." Finally having like fully had that kick into his mind, Steel would say, "Kid, you'll never change." As Izuku and Steel would both laugh, and this is when the students would return back to class after a very short break. Once there, this is when the students would all be informed of the fact that the UA Sports Festival event was actually going to be held soon. And with Izuku excited as ever for the upcoming challenge, Izuku would not be capable of waiting for this thing to start. I mean, in his eyes, he just wants it to happen now. So we would just watch on as Izuku and Uraraka are both like, "Yeah, are you gonna do your best?" Izuku and Uraraka in the back of the room just like acting completely out of character, with everybody laughing. That is, until the class would be dispersed and we would see that there was a bunch of people standing outside of their classroom trying to get a gauge of what the competition would be like. And so Izuku, noticing this, would be told by Steel, "Kid, act calm and collected," with Izuku walking by, kind of like trying his best to like not walk too stiffly, as Steel's like, "Kid, come on, show some backbone." A kid in the back noticing Izuku as he would say, "Can't believe UA's just letting anyone in. Guess the rumors about a student who actually managed to defeat that thing were false. Izuku having a bead of sweat drop from his face as Steel would tell him, "See kid, you can defeat the strongest monster ever, but if you don't act like it, people won't respect ya." Izuku saying, yeah, whatever, one step at a time. This is when during lunch period, we would see Izuku and Uraraka both sitting at the lunch table alongside Ida as they would be talking about what this would mean to them. Uraraka explaining that it would mean a lot considering that she needs to become a great pro, because truth be told, she needs the money. Izuku being like, oh, that's a good reason. Ida going on to say that he simply wants to make his family name proud. Izuku being like, I thought I recognized you. All the while Izuku would just go on to say that he just wants to live out his dream of being a hero, and he wants to show the world that he's no longer the weakling that he once was. Ida and Uraraka both smiling, as this is when we would jump cut to the actual day of the sports festival. Izuku walking over towards the podium with the mic as staring at the gigantic crowd of people, Izuku would say, is this on? My name is Izuku Midoriya, and I just wanted to wish everybody luck. I'm doing a horrible job at this. Did I just say that out loud? Deku would say as everybody's just like, it's all right, kid, come on, give a speech. Izuku going, I guess for the longest time ever, I've wanted to be a hero, so your support would mean the world to me. Thank you very much. Bowing down as he just walks off the podium, and Midnight's like, okay, moving on. This is when she would announce the first event of the UA Sports Festival, some people actually kind of thinking that the way that Izuku acted was kind of funny, so now he has a couple of fans, and so with the event starting, Izuku would ask Steel what form should probably be best, flight or speed. Steel telling him that he could actually just interchange between both depending on the obstacles, seeing as this isn't as much of race as it is an obstacle course. So with Izuku hearing that, he would say he's right about that. Looking behind him and seeing Todoroki, he would think that he's most likely going to start things off with an ice attack. So, turning to Steel, Izuku would say, alright, flight mode. Immediately flying into the air, as the moment that the bell would be set off, Izuku would go flying past everybody, leaving a bit of a shockwave at how fast he was actually moving. That is, until randomly a 0-pointer would appear before him, Izuku going, what? These are here? Steel telling him, concentrate! Izuku reeling his arm back as he would say, strength mode! Punching straight through that 0-pointer, with Izuku once again saying, flight mode! As suddenly launching into the air, Izuku would fly towards the finish line, completely impeded by anybody else, since nobody else could realistically catch up to him, seeing as bro was flying about as fast as Hawks right now. Alright, I ain't gonna lie, I'm recording this on a different day because I have been very lazy the past 2 days, so I don't really remember exactly where I left off, but I'm pretty sure that Deku would just did the little race at the UA Sports Festival, and even if I didn't cover it, I mean, bro has a flight mode and a super speed mode. I don't think I need to say more than that. Anyways, to get back into the story, what ends up taking place following this is we get the events of the cavalry battle beginning to take place. However, due to the fact that I absolutely hate that event, we're going to be completely glazing over that thing because don't nobody care about that. And we're instead going to be getting into the 1v1 battles, which leads us to Deku versus Shinso round 1, which honestly, it's not too crazy. Keep in mind, bro has a mind control quirk, and Deku just so happens to have a little buddy by the name of Steel, which means that worst case scenario, Steel just snaps him out of it and Deku rushes this man Shinso and straight 1-2 pieces this man. So that match is completely just doesn't matter low key, and then we're able to get into the next match, which actually has a lot more stakes and I think could actually make to be an interesting one, which is Todoroki versus Deku. Now, normally, obviously, we know Todoroki, he kind of does the whole, are you All Might's secret love child to Deku? But, I mean, he doesn't have a quirk remotely similar to All Might, so that scene never happens. And instead, it's replaced with the scene of Todoroki telling Deku that he's going to beat him with half of his power. Deku obviously taking offense to that, and Steel probably saying something like, that kid's real cocky, kid. He just threatened you and said that he was going to take you out with half of his power. Why don't we show him the difference between the two of us? Deku looking at Steel and being like, but Steel, I don't really want to take things that. Steel's just like, nah, we got this. As they both kind of step into the ring, and immediately Steel's like, kid, use super strength mode. No doubt he's gonna try to start things off with a giant iceberg. Izuku saying, right, as suddenly we hear this man saying, turbo strength mode, and the power suit just immediately like bulks up. We got this blue freaking swirling energy going all around Deku, like this man's straight aura farming, and then we got President Mike in the background just going, and Izuku Midoriya decides to start things off with his turbo strength mode. How will this fight turn out? As we watch Todoroki like shoot like a massive geyser of ice at Deku, while this man straight up bulldozes it on some Hulk timing, and as soon as he gets close, Todoroki through sheer instinct would probably end up shooting his hand out attempting to blow flames at him. But due to the fact that Deku has this suit, which is like completely made of armor, I can see him not even being blown back by it or actually damaged whatsoever. I mean, we see this man take on an Ultra Link, which is literally like what, lava? So, I mean, come on now, let's be real. This is not doing nothing. So instead, we watch as Deku grabs onto Todoroki and Steel says, all right, end it, with Izuku pretty much like grabbing him by like his shirt and like collar part and like attempting to throw him off. This, however, is when Todoroki, using, some smarts, would end up grabbing onto Deku's own arm and freezing the suit, like point blank range, making Deku's like left arm immobile. So Todoroki has the opportunity to use his ice to kind of like start gliding around the arena. This is when Steel would tell him, come on kid, flight mode now, as Izuku's like, right, and he immediately just like turns on the jets. This man flies into the air and like goes after Todoroki, but Todoroki, being smart, would shoot an ice geyser towards him, knowing that in this mode, he'll have a lot more difficulties with this, and he would be very right about that. Because with the ice hitting Deku, this would actually cause him to be in like this giant like iceberg thing, falling into the ring with Todoroki smiling, thinking that everything was over. However, this is when turbo energy would blast off that little iceberg, with Izuku breaking out of it back into his turbo strength mode, as we would see Todoroki staring at Deku, attempting to keep him back with ice. However, once figuring out that that combination wouldn't work, he would attempt to do the same thing he just previously did, getting some distance and forcing Deku to change out of his strength mode. However, unlike the last time, that just wouldn't work, because this time Deku knows what's happening, and I'm pretty sure we can all agree he's more than smart enough to recognize something's going on. So the moment that Todoroki would attempt it, Deku would say something kinda cool for once, being like, the same trick won't work twice, lunging towards him, as turning into his cannon mode, he would wrecking ball Todoroki, spinning as Todoroki gets knocked out of the ring, Deku on top of him. So meaning like both of them were technically out of bounds, but because Deku was like on top of him, quite literally crushing him, mind you, the announcers would say, and Izuku Midoriya is the winner, prompting him to like stand up and like an unconscious Todoroki to be taken to Recovery Girl. This is when Steel will tell Deku, finally kid, it's about time you use your strength. I guess I'm a better coach than I realize. Deku thanking Steel, as the next event would begin, and we would get the whole course of events with Ida finding out that his older brother Tensei has actually just been targeted by the hero killer, so he would once again forfeit, and the final match after Bakugo would clear the gauntlet would pretty much be another rematch between Bakugo and Deku. However, due to Bakugo recognizing that his explosions won't particularly work too well against Deku, especially not on the ground, we would watch as Bakugo pretty much makes his way into the ring, eyes closed, thinking of strategies that he could use to defeat Deku in these different circumstances, when he would realize that Todoroki was onto something. If he keeps the battle in the air, where Deku has no other choice but to deploy his flight mode, that could give him the advantage. So with the announcer telling everybody that the match would begin, we would watch on as Bakugo would blast explosions at the ground, shooting himself into the air, saying, come on Deku, let's take the fight up here. Deku saying, come on Steel, flight mode. As shooting off into the air, Deku would stand off between Bakugo, who would smirk, telling him that up here, he's gonna be taking him down, rushing towards the direction of Deku, who in the air is actually a lot faster than Bakugo, shocking the boy who had thought that this would give him an advantage. So with Deku lunging towards the direction of Bakugo and reeling his fist back to throw a blow, Bakugo would feel the impact. However, grabbing onto the suit of armor of Deku, Bakugo would scream out, die! As blasting a point-blank explosion towards the chest of Deku, he would send both of them barreling into the ground, crashing into the ring, where once the smoke would clear, it would be noted that Deku was the one getting back up, Bakugo unconscious, as in that moment of Bakugo pretty much trying to like slam him down onto the ground Rock Lee style, Deku would actually reverse things on him and straight up pile drove him into the ground. Deku getting up slowly as staring at his childhood friend, he would feel bad, but this would almost like cement a thing for Deku of leaving that past scared, weak version of himself who feared Bakugo just completely in the past. That was gone. That was no longer him. And with him raising his fists, that would be the final declaration of him showing Steel and the rest of the world that he was here. So with him making that bold declaration and statement to the world, this is when we would jump cut to everybody getting their medals. Deku obviously having first place, and people just going crazy because that was the same shy, timid kid who at the end of the sports festival seemed to have low-key gone through some changes. All Might most definitely noting that, as he'd probably whisper something to Deku along the lines of being proud of him, all the while giving him his medal. That said, the sports festival event not really having too many more stakes or anything after that, we kind of just jump back to what happens after the fact. All of the students having received their letters of not recommendations, what is it, like their internship opportunities? Yeah, something like that, where they received their intern opportunities, and it's there where we end up seeing Deku sitting at his desk, just looking at the flood of just different internship opportunities that Deku could actually take part of. Him literally stating off some of the craziest names you could think of and just being like, who do I pick? Us watching as the students around him would be like, some problem you got, Midoriya. Him pretty much asking Steel internally who he thinks he should intern with. Steel telling him that he thinks he should go with the highest ranked hero that sent a recommendation letter, with Izuku seeing the name Best Jeanist. This would prompt Deku to think that that's probably a good idea. And this is when Izuku accepting that internship opportunity, we watch him boarding a bus with a very nervous Izuku in the train, Steel asking him why they even bother to travel this way when he could just fly around. Him telling Steel that he knows that's illegal. Steel saying so, he's gonna be a hero one day. Izuku would just be like, whatever. As on the other side of the bus, like a different like little train section, would be Katsuki Bakugo. Deku never having even realized that he actually picked the same agency. Seeing as on that same day, before Deku could even announce who he was going with, this is when the hero Midnight would have been introduced to the class, and we would have gotten the whole hero name stuff, which eventually results in Deku picking the robot hero Max Steel, as a bit of a homage to the person that Steel originally worked with. Steel actually finding that as a very cool thing, us obviously flashing back to the present time with Deku onboarding the bus. This is when as Deku and Bakugo would both do this, they would stare at each other. Bakugo would be like, huh? You picked this agency? Deku looking at him and be like, Bakugo, you chose Best Jeanist as well? Bakugo be like, of course I did, nerd! I wasn't gonna pass up the opportunity to work with the number 4 hero! Deku saying, oh, right, I didn't expect you were, as we see Best Jeanist exit the building and welcome both students. This would most likely result in a bunch of like funny scenes, which serves better as like an animated stuff, because obviously we see Deku most likely serving as an exemplary like student for Best Jeanist. Like Deku would probably have his hair combed down the way that we see in the actual thumbnail instead of all frizzy like it always is, with like Izuku actually like passing most of his tests, learning about like hero patrol and how to run an agency, and watching Best Jeanist take on different opponents and stuff like that. He would likely be liked by his sidekicks, although while Bakugo would be like a problem child, Deku consistently apologizing for him and, you know, trying to get Bakugo to listen, but Bakugo would probably be like, leave me alone, damn nerd, or something like that, with us, you know, kind of just like having the entire internship be like a moment for Bakugo and Deku's relationship to like literally just get worse. Bakugo straight up just disliking Deku more and more, being like, I thought I disliked you when you were quirkless, but I dislike you even more now, nerd. Who do you think you are? You know, kind of like making things a lot worse for the two of them, with obviously the Hosu incident still taking place, which would actually be like horrific, just considering the fact that A, no Deku means B, no Gran Torino. And with none of those two characters, this means that the destruction that would be caused on the city of Hosu would be significantly worsened, because Gran Torino helped Endeavor a lot. And 2, this means that the hero Native and Ida would probably both face the same fate, either death or paralyzation for Ida, which I don't think I have to tell you guys is a pretty bad outcome, but I mean, it's a little better than death. And considering that I've been killing off Ida in practically all my what ifs recently, I'm gonna be saying that this time he just gets paralyzed. So with all of the students eventually being told of their class rep status as, being paralyzed, and he confesses to the team through tears that he was revenge filled, and he made a dumb mistake, advising them never to do the same thing as him. This is when the class would cry over Ida and be like, "We swear we're gonna become great heroes, to avenge you." With Ida, probably crying or something like that, would eventually lead to the school having a bunch of issues with the media, them being like, UA is incompetent, UA can't take care of their students, yada yada yada. You guys get the point. Point is, eventually after say a month, 2 weeks of very, very bad publicity for UA, the school would once again reopen. And with that would come the rescue training race, which I don't think I have to tell you guys, Deku performs exceptionally in, just due to the fact that he's capable of using his super speed mode to just blitz around the facility until he finds All Might and beats Zero out. This means that we end up jump cutting to what happens after the fact, and we get Aizawa in the classroom going, "Alright class, I know that we've had some recently chaotic time of events lately, but just because things have been bad doesn't mean we've forgotten about your final exams. Everybody be sure to do your best studying because you will be taking them in the end of the week." The class all kind of freaking out, all the while Deku in the back would tell Steel that he's gonna ace this thing. Steel telling him, heck yeah he is, they've been studying for weeks, which is Steel's least favorite thing to do. Izuku saying that he's glad he did it regardless of Steel's whining, because he knew that UA was going to be back up and running, and he took advantage of every second. So with the other people of UA being like, "Oh crap, I didn't think we were going to take the exams," Izuku would offer to tutor people, and we would have a room full of Momo and Deku, both kind of tutoring the rest of the students, us eventually getting to the actual physical portion of the final exams arc, with what ends up taking place here being a repeat of what we get in the original timeline, due to two things. One, Deku and Bakugo really don't like each other in this timeline, and two, who else is Deku actually gonna fight? Which one of these heroes could actually light a candle to Deku? Aizawa can't exactly cancel Deku's turbo energy. It doesn't function like other quirks do. It's in fact, it can't even really be qualified as a quirk. Deku is a direct descendant of Max Steel, so yeah, sucks to suck. Anyways though, with that being the case, All Might would pretty much end up arriving and scaring Deku, who in this timeline would obviously still idolize the man. This would lead Steel to telling Izuku to get its bearings together, that he's gonna fight the symbol of peace whether he likes it or not, and there's no way they're gonna take the coward's way out. Izuku freaking out, saying that he should just be smarter. With his super speed, he can just outrun All Might and win. Steel telling him that that's not the way that they should do things. Plus, he doesn't think that's how his teammate would like to do things either. Him looking at Bakugo as he could see this maniacal look in his eyes of just "Damn Deku, you better not try to outrun this because I'm gonna kill the #1 hero All Might." Deku freaking out as we pretty much end up seeing a tag team, a very bad tag team might I add, of Deku and Bakugo, where Deku in an attempt of using his super strength mode would try to fight All Might one-on-one. However, one very apparent weakness would be noted, and that would be the fact that Deku is just holding back way more than he has to due to the admiration that he actually feels towards All Might, eventually getting clobbered into the ground after Bakugo would, of course, and with All Might shoving his fist into the armor straight up dang near causing it to blow up. This is when Deku would be sent crashing into a building, Steel telling him that they're taking crazy damage out there, and unless he starts fighting back seriously, they might even die. Izuku would say, "I can't. That's All Might." Steel telling him, "Then that's more of a reason for you to take him seriously. You're underestimating the symbol of peace, maybe the greatest hero ever." Izuku's eyes narrowing as he would say, "You're right, Steel. Come on, speed mode." Blitzing behind All Might as quickly changing into cannon mode, Deku would say, "Cannon mode," blasting himself towards the direction of All Might as he straight up shoves All Might into the ground, and through continuous spins, it's like he has a car on top of him, and he's just burning out on All Might, which definitely would cause significant damage on the big brute, leading our beloved hero All Might to eventually punch at the ground, digging a crevice so deep that it kind of mess up the equilibrium of Deku, and from that fact, All Might then goes on to deliver a powerful blow, sending Deku backwards. However, due to the fact that he's in his cannon mode, he uses that momentum of All Might to spin even faster than he normally can and go right back at All Might, slamming him into the ground. All Might realizing that he needs to go all out, and these weights are just preventing him from doing so. So as All Might's literally starting to get clobbered, this is when Deku, recognizing like, damn, like he might be hurt, would stop. All Might getting up as he would say, "What's the problem, hero? Don't have what it takes to take down a villain?" Him smashing both of his weights as he would tell Deku that he made a big mistake. This is when Deku would be smashed through like 4 buildings as All Might, finally having thrown a crazy blow, would stare at Deku, telling him to try holding back now. All Might smashing his anklet weights, with Principal Nezu saying that that was a smart idea, considering the power of their up and coming student. Him having to hold back could have been detrimental for All Might. So with All Might staring at like Deku, you know, who's like now trying to get up, thinking about what he can do, this is when Steel would tell him, "Kid, I think our best bet in this scenario is pouring all of our energy into one clash. Believe it or not, kid, you're way stronger than All Might. So if you pour even 50% of your strength into this blow, I guarantee you'll win." Deku hearing Steel out and saying, "I hope you're right about this." Turbo, strength mode, lunging towards the direction of All Might as reeling his fists back, and All Might doing the same. We get a fist clash of both of them. All Might's arm getting blown back as he would be sent crashing into a building. All the while, the glowing suit of Deku would stand tall and victorious. All Might lifting himself out of the rubble with a smile as his arm would be like purplish, like bruised up. This is when Izuku, smiling within the suit, would say, "Thanks, Steel. You help me every time I need it. You give me advice, and you push me back up whenever I fall. You're the best." Steel telling him, "What can I say? I'm your loyal companion." Deku staring at Steel and saying that he's even more than that. As from here, we see the boy grabbing the unconscious Bakugo, who's slightly waking up as he's walking out the exit, would say, "Damn it, Deku, we needed to beat him." Deku saying, "I already did, Bakugo," as they exit the area, and that would conclude the whole little like final exams arc, meaning that we now have the leeway to get into the Forest Training Camp arc, which mostly goes just like you would expect it to. Mind you, Deku's personality is somewhat very similar to what we get in canon, meaning that the only little tidbit of interactions that I could see going differently would consist of 2. Number 1, the fights against Pixie Bob's little like monster creations that she can create, which by the way is just like a freaking insanely overpowered quirk, and the whole little saving Koda scene, which in case you guys forget what I'm talking about, it's that one part where Koda falls and Deku using One For All saves him. The only real change there would be the fact that he would use flight mode to catch onto Koda. Everybody being like, "Whoa dude, you can react that fast?" With Deku smiling saying, "Yeah, somewhat." Izuku still hearing about the fact that Koda's parents were killed by a very, very aggressive villain and whatever comes after that. As we now jump cut to what happens during the actual Vanguard Action Squad, meaning that the night that Deku would go over to see Koda, the whole Muscular fight incidents, that still takes place. So as Muscular would pretty much make his entrance saying something along the lines of, "The rest of the villains get to have all the fun, meanwhile they send me to fight after a bunch of kids?" Asking the 2 to stay still while he kills them, as we watch Izuku tell him that that's not gonna happen, getting down to eye level with Koda and telling him to run away, that he got this with a genuine smile. Koda at this would attempt to move, but being unable to, would force Deku to grab Koda and leap out of the way. Muscular's gigantic muscle fiber fist coated, smashing onto the ground, as Deku looking up at Muscular would try to say some corny one-liner. As getting up, Izuku would quickly go on to say, "Turbo, strength mode," turning into this gigantic like strong version of himself. As looking towards Muscular, he would tell him if he wants to back down now. Muscular smiling as he would say, "Kid, you just made my day," lunging in towards him as Deku sending a punch simultaneously with Muscular would cause a shockwave to blast through the area. Koda being blown back as he's like, "What? How are you 2 so strong?" Like holding a hand up as he's trying to watch the fight, as Deku's just sitting there clobbering Muscular, whose muscles fibers are providing insane padding. All the while Muscular would be hitting back at Deku, however his armor would be providing crazy padding. This would lead Deku to recognizing one thing. This is gonna be a battle of attrition. meaning that Deku was just 100% gonna come on top, because even though he knows he can't waste all his energy on Muscular, Izuku knows it won't be the end of the world if he uses a significant amount of it to take the big brute out. So with that being said, as both behemoths would be clashing on top of this mountain, fists going back and forth, punches being thrown at their bodies over and over, this is when suddenly Izuku would smile, saying, "That enough, Steel?" Steel telling him, "Huh, of course it is, kid." Izuku charging all of that turbo energy into one fist, as with one final blow, Deku would quite literally punch Muscular off the cliffside and onto the ground, leaving the man completely unconscious and out for at least a week, with Deku turning towards Koda, who was hiding behind a tree, trying not to be blown back by the force of the blows. And with Deku transforming into his speed mode, he would tell Koda, "Don't worry, the monster's been taken care of," taking him right back towards Aizawa, where we watch Izuku in flight mode patrol the forest in search of anybody that needs help, noting that there was 2 students being chased around by a Nomu, and Momo Yaoyorozu and Yosetsu Awase, the guy who can like weld stuff together in case you don't remember. But with Izuku noting that that was taking place alongside Dark Shadow freaking out, Deku would ask Steel who he should help, Steel telling him that right now, he needs to do both. Him telling him to use Turbo Clone Mode. Deku going, "What? I have that?" With Steel explaining to Izuku that he does, but it requires a massive amount of energy and extreme concentration, asking Izuku if he thinks he can do that. Deku telling him that he has to, as he would say, "Turbo Clone Mode," suddenly turning into 3 versions of himself, as one of them would continue patrolling the air, and the rest of them would lunge towards the direction of Tokiyami and Momo respectively. Izuku landing by Momo and saying not to worry, as immediately Izuku would tap into his strength mode, draining a considerable amount of his reserves, as looking towards the Nomu, having fought one previously and knowing what it took for that thing, Izuku prepares himself for a crazy long fought battle. But as soon as he lands one punch, Izuku would recognize one thing. This Nomu was just so much weaker than what he had thought it was gonna be, having taken that thing out with nothing more than like 6-7 punch. I said the thing. Well, I don't feel like editing at all. Anyways, after landing those punches, Izuku would proceed to look at Momo, telling her if she's okay, her nodding as that clone would seemingly dissipate. Us watching as the one right in front of Tokiyami, which is actually the original one, would look slightly less strained, telling Steel that he thinks he only has another 30 seconds of this left. Steel telling him that he's wrong, it's actually 20. Izuku looking at Steel and telling him that that's not helping, with Steel saying, "Watch out!" Izuku barely managing to dodge Tokiyami's Dark Shadow onslaught, as thinking quick, he would immediately tap into his speed mode, saying, "Come after me!" Izuku having the bright idea to lead him towards the direction of Todoroki, who he knows could easily handle him. So, as soon as Tokiyami would arrive destroying Moonfish, which is a gigantic plus, Todoroki would shoot flames towards the direction of Tokiyami, leading him to finally control Dark Shadow, as we watch Izuku fall down onto both knees, completely depleted practically, since like it took him like 15 seconds to get to Todoroki, and he still had to keep dodging the blows of Tokiyami. Bro's just out cold. This is when we would see Shoji grabbing at Deku and picking him over his shoulders, with a very energy depleted Deku going, "Thanks," although while Bakugo in the background would say, "Can't believe you ran out of energy that fast, Deku. Don't you know there's more villains around? Now we gotta pick up the slack." Deku saying, "And I'll thank you for that later." Us watching as the group makes their way through the forest, Izuku telling them that last he saw, Tsuyu and Uraraku were in trouble, making their way towards that direction, with Toga fleeing the scene, saying, "I don't feel like dying tonight." This is when we jump cut to what happens following this in the Mr. Compress incident, with 2 interesting things taking place. Number 1 being that Deku actually is one of the people who gets kidnapped alongside Bakugo, and number 2 being that the heroes in this time don't even know where in the world the facility for making the Nomus would be. Because remember, the only reason they did it in the original was due to Awase placing that microchip tracker which Momo ends up using, leading to the whole like students chasing after Bakugo and stuff. You get the point. Anyways though, with that being said, we're able to actually zoom in on Deku and Bakugo both being questioned by the villains. "So, heroes, it seems you got yourself in a bit of a predicament. Specifically you. Shigaraki grabbing at the face of Deku as he would say, "What was it you said to me the last time we were together? That I wouldn't get away? Well, look how that's turned out. Now you're in front of me, and all it would take is placing my pinky finger on your face before seeing you die." Deku glaring at Shigaraki, who would say, Whoa there, kid. You don't want to piss me off even more, do ya? Right now I might let you live." Him then turning away as he would say, "Because you know, the League of Villains might need some help, and I've got 2 applicants right in front of me. So now it's up to both of you to make a choice. Do you want to live, or do you want to die?" Steel in Izuku's head telling him to just accept the offer, that so long as they live, they'll have the opportunity to pick things back up where they started, and that right now staying alive and charging up turbo energy is the most important thing. Deku telling Steel that he'll never accept being a villain. Steel smiling as he would say, "Then it was nice knowing you, kid. We're going out together." Shigaraki going over towards Deku about to decay him until Bakugo would spit on him, telling him that he's a piece of garbage and to let him loose and see what happens. Shigaraki stopping and saying, "Maybe we should show our little guests here a little proper hospitality." Some villains approaching them as they'd be about to kill them, with Shigaraki saying, "No, not yet. Let's give them some time to think about their decisions." Us watching as Deku and Bakugo both tied up to a chair would finally have a heart-to-heart. Deku asking Bakugo what he plans to do, if he's going to become a villain or not. Bakugo saying, "Huh? You really think I'd become a villain, Deku? You're even more of a loser than I thought. If you even consider becoming a villain, then I'll personally be the one to blow you up." Deku smiling as he would say, "And I'd have it no other way. But same goes right back at you, Bakugo. If you even think about, damn it, Deku, didn't I already tell you that I wasn't even considering it? What is there to talk about? At this point, we just gotta bide our time until the heroes arrive, because I know they will. And once they do, and I get my hands on that damn chaplet bastard, I'll blow him up so damn hard they'll be cleaning him up for weeks." With Deku having a face of shock as he would say, "You sure you're not already a villain?" Bakugo being like, "Shut up!" As we hear chuckling Deku looking at Bakugo and just pretty much starting to make conversation, eventually probably leading to a talk between Deku and Bakugo on why things have always been the way that they have. Bakugo going on to tell him, well, the truth, that all his life he was told he was the strongest, he was the best, and the weak can't compete. And here comes weak little old Izuku with all these ambitions, with all these goals, thinking that it was possible to even become a hero. In his eyes, it was just detrimental to his entire worldview. So putting him down just felt like the way to prove himself right. And with Deku hearing that and both of them having like a little bit of a heart-to-heart, this is when Shigaraki would enter the room going, "Well, isn't that sweet? Now, I've given you a more than enough time. 2 days, in fact. So it's about time both of you decide. Do you live or do you die?" Until suddenly you hear knocks at the door with a voice going, "Pizza delivery." Shigaraki going, "We didn't order any," as All Might's fist would smash through the wall and the heroes would enter. Kamui Woods entangling everybody within his wood, as we would then watch all of them be unconscious. This is when the whole scenario would take place, in which portals would open and the League of Villains would disappear, alongside Deku and Bakugo. Both of them landing, as noting a man in a suit who was just giving off this strange murderous aura. Izuku would ask who he is, all for one explaining his name and telling them that this is their final chance to accept his student's offer. Will they join them or will they die? Bakugo blasting an explosion at the air as he would tell him that he'd rather die, blasting towards the direction of All for One, who's shooting him backwards with one hand, would then laugh, telling the boy that he's nothing more than an ant in the face of true power. Izuku staring at Bakugo, who's already unconscious, mind you, from that one blow, would ask Steel one question. "Is there any mode that you can think of, Steel, that could even give me a remote chance of winning? Because if there is, I need it now, no matter what the consequences are." Steel telling him that there is one, but it could kill him. Izuku telling him that that doesn't matter now, that he has to save Bakugo, as Steel would tell him, "Turbo, Titan mode." This is when we would watch Izuku hit the ground with both knees as energy would start flying off of him, shooting towards the core of steel, who starts morphing it into the armor. We watch on as Izuku's life energy starts literally draining out of his body, and he can feel himself growing weaker and weaker. That is, until his eyes glow a gradient blue-like color, and shooting this aura into the air, Izuku can feel all of the turbo energy that he's been holding in reserves finally come to life. It powering the suit and giving Deku the strength to stand back up, as a gigantic titan-like mode would be out in front of them, with giant wings that can serve as swords as well. Us watching as Deku would ask All For One if he's ready, the madman telling him that he is. Izuku lunging towards him, who would place up barriers, Deku shattering right through them, as hitting him with one of the blades, he would send All For One crashing out of the building. All the while the villains would be attempting to shoot multiple attacks at him, Toga throwing a knife which would do nothing, cremation flames being sent fire at Deku who wouldn't even feel the impact, and Magna trying to use his quirk in order to push Deku backwards. However, the gigantic stature of Deku is not allowing that quirk to even take effect, Shigaraki staying back knowing that if he gets close, he could die to that thing. With Mr. Compress thinking the same thing, as Deku flying into the air and seeing where All For One had just landed, he would land on top of the building with a punch outstretched. However, All For One, using an amalgamation of quirks, would counter back, telling the boy that he never expected a quirk like this to be out there, one that can rival One For All. Izuku punching forward as he would say, "I won't lose," punching forth as All For One's strength would start to be pushed back, and he would realize the difference between the two. This is when All For One's entire arm would be shattered, like every single piece, and Deku then smashing at the ground of All For One, though he was like a mosquito or a fly that was bothering him, would smash All For One into the earth. Deku then kicking at him like he was a freaking soccer ball or something. As flying towards him in the air, Izuku would shoot a beam of energy straight from his chest, eliminating All For One. Mind you, not killing him, but like he takes him out of commission, pretty much is all I'm trying to say. But yeah, as All For One would land on the ground, Deku would stand over him, telling him that it's over. All For One cackling as he would tell Izuku that it will never be over, not so long as he's alive, with Deku telling him that's fine. He'll just have to take him down as many times as it takes. This is when suddenly a chopper would arrive and multiple heroes would be at the scene, all watching as a camera would pan to a defeated All For One on the ground, with All Might arriving on the scene almost instantaneously, staring at Deku and saying if he defeated him. Deku telling him that he did, as turning back into his regular mode, Deku would smile, with All Might explaining that he will never understand just how proud he is of the feat he accomplished. All the while Deku would just reply by telling All Might that he doesn't need his praises. After all, that's the job of a hero. With the scene ending and the story coming to its finite conclusion.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever!